Good afternoon, everyone. I guess almost good afternoon. Thank you for being here. The first minutes of my talk will be inspired in a talk that Dick Hondell gave at LinuxCon North America in 2013. So if you look at his talk, there are many, many similarities. So, sure? Oh, sure. It's better now? Is it better? Sorry? Louder? Can you increase the volume, please? Is it better now? Okay. So this is an interactive session, so please interrupt me anytime you want. We are here to not me talk, but to answer your questions. So please interrupt me anytime you want. So my name is Peter. I have been doing open source for a long, long time. Yesterday I called my sister from the hotel and I had to tell her that I'm doing Linux for more time than she's on this planet. And you don't tell that to a teenager. It makes you feel very, very old. But that's how it is. Before I continue, I would like to make a question to my audience. Who here knows what Linux is? Okay, that's good. Who here uses Linux? Oh, that's awesome. Great. So for those who doesn't know, Linux is an operating system. And an operating system is a piece of software that does some boring stuff. So for example, if you write an application, you don't need to know how your hardware works. If you want to write a file, for example, if you want to save data, you just ask the operating system to do it for you. So this way you can focus on what your application is doing. And Linux is one operating system like Windows is, but Linux is better. And it's better because it's free and open source, which I'm going to talk what this means today. But if you take a proprietary product, the goal is selling licenses. So the owner of the product will do anything to sell licenses to make you their customer. They prefer to keep you customer than doing the right thing. On the other way around, open source is motivated by innovation. So the day open source stops, the day one project stops innovation, the day development stops, the project is dead. So it's not easy, but it's awesome. So that's what makes Linux a good thing. So Collabora, the company I work for, is doing open source for a long time. No, can stay. That's the first 20 minutes. It's just this line. So Collabora is doing open source for quite a while. We have invested heavily on building a team of open source leaders. And not only on Linux, really all across the stack. You can imagine any open source project that's relevant, like Linux, graphics, networking, sound, multimedia, you name it. Everything Collabora is doing. And we do that because we believe that open source is the best way to innovate. Innovation is like key for us, and it's key for our customers. So this is why we're doing that. And this is why I have these topics, business growth using open source. I guess I'm running out of ideas for topics, but what I'm really going to talk today is about innovation, and this is very, very related to open source. Let me ask you a quick question. How many of you here are CEOs? 1, 2, okay. Marketing department? Head of sales, okay, 1. Okay. Finance department. Okay, so how many of you are engineers? Okay, great. So all of us, all the engineers on the room, we obviously think that Linux is cool, that open source is awesome, but this is happening mostly in our community. If you go outside the engineer community, if you go outside the hacker community, it's very common to get often asked like, what's this Linux thing? What is open source thing? And this is mostly because the impact we are creating now. This is mostly because what we do now gets unnoticed. Linux per se if you imagine Linux itself, it's the thing you don't see. You tell people, oh, if you're using a big website, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Google, eBay, any big website, you name it, you're using Linux. This connects people with this idea. But the real thing, what the user perceives, is the clients they are using, the software they're interacting with. And I lost myself here. So yes. Actually, I'm talking too fast. Am I talking too fast? Okay. So I've been doing Linux for a long time now, and in 2008 I did something awesome in Brazil. I was in a project that delivered computers with Linux to every school in the country. This was more or less 100,000 computers, 100,000 seats with Linux that were delivered, and there were amazing challenges. Like Brazil is a huge country, and we have like many rainforests, and some computers needed to be delivered by boat. We had some Indians, the chief of the tribe, that needed to authorize the guy to go there. So it was really, really challenging, but it was nice. And at that time, in 2008, the iPhone that we saw in the other room was a new thing. And smartphones were not the primary device, the primary client device of many people. And in 2008, Linux was still fighting for relevance on the desktop. In 1998, G. Condell, now he's at VMware, at that time he was Intel, predicted that 1999, long time ago, 17 years ago, would be the year of Linux on the desktop. And he couldn't be more wrong about that. It didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. But if Dick has changed his prediction to that in 2014, Linux would be the predominant client platform, that would have been way more ambitious, and that would have been true. If you look client computing today, by and large, that is Linux. Yes, you have iPhones, you have iPads that are extremely popular, but Android actually is the #1 platform from phones, and it's not far from tablets. If you look at the numbers in the US, iPhones and iPads are really expressive, but if you look worldwide, Android is by far the #1. And by far I mean something like 80%. So that's amazing. And Android is Linux. It's not advertised as this, but under it is Linux. And not only Linux, it's plenty of open source stuff. And then you look at things like Google Chromebooks. Who here know what a Chromebook is? A Chromebook is a device that Google is selling that is a small, compact computer that has low price, and it's awesome. It has many features like extremely large battery life. It connects well with all Google services, whatever. Chromebook selling figures are impressive, and for the first time this year, Chromebooks outsold Macs in the US. So while Apple sold 1.7 million Mac computers, Mac portable computers in the US, Chromebooks sold more than 2 million. So that's really impressive. That never happened before. And Chromebooks are also deployed in education, and impressive figures were deployed both in the US and Europe for pupils and teachers. So this is the primary client platform for education for a lot of people. So the year of Linux in the desktop is actually in the past. We reached the point where a lot of people use Linux as the primary platform, and they may not even be aware of it. If you look at one of the biggest Linux distributions, I would let you try to guess which distribution I'm talking to. They try very hard to not mention Linux. If you go to their website, they are one of the biggest ones. They don't use the word Linux. They try to hide it. And as a thank you note for them, I won't mention their name, even if my colleague here is correct in his guess. So if you use Android, you don't have penguins. That's the logo of Linux. You have that green Android thing. If you're talking about Chromebooks, you have Chrome OS. That's Linux underneath. So, but the really interesting thing, the really game changer is that it's not much the low end. It's not that, that's the cheap part where Linux is succeeding, Linux and open source in general. Actually, it's the other way around. Linux is being used in devices or in solutions where innovation are the key. You see, for example, I'm talking about business growth using open source. Google with their Chromebooks, Google didn't want to sell computers. Google didn't want to compete with Apple. Google's goal with Chromebooks is to get more customers for their service. You are using Gmail, you're using Google Drive, you're using their search. This is the only reason why they're doing that. And this is a great example of how Google increased the size of their business using open source. So that's the basic idea. So we at Collabora, we worked with past few years with Android and Chrome OS, and we were solving the stuff that are related to the life cycle of the products, because you have loads of open source projects that are ready, that you can take and use, but this is more related to when you're creating your product. Google now has millions of Chromebooks out there, and they have a problem of maintenance. Google needs to keep releasing updates. Google needs to keep releasing security stuff for their products. And if you use open source properly, the communities in which you build your product on top of will do that for you. You need to do it properly. You need to release your code properly. But once your code is upstream, once your driver is part of the Linux kernel, it's not your problem anymore. It's the community who is going to maintain. It's the community who is going to fix. It's the community that you're going to blame if something goes wrong. And that's amazing. That's amazing. That saves you a lot of money. That's like, it's really, really impressive. So, do you have any questions until now? Yes, please.
Is there any risk when we are talking about open source and it is related to the community? I mean, let's say I build a business at top of open source, and the community is always fixing and improving this. Doesn't that feel a little bit risky for me? I mean, yes, there's a lot of people are contributing, but is it, let's say, controllable in a controllable environment, or?
Thank you for the question. Very interesting. I would split the risks in two parts. One of the risks is related to license compliance, but this is actually a very, very small risk. The trend today is that instead of you suing people, you bring them to contribute. So this is the official speech today. So license compliance, I would say, is a very, very low risk today. Even if you intentionally do something that's not nice, you are safe. From this, the risk of your losing control, the idea of free software is that your solution won't be entirely free software. You build your solution on top of many building blocks of free software, and each of these building blocks has its own community that's working very, very hard to make sure that each building block succeeds amazingly well. And by you using one of those building blocks, or many of them, the relevance of each building block increases, which adds more traction to the community, and also the feedback loop also feeds for your help. The idea of open source is not that you only take. If you start using something that's really important to you, sometimes you may contribute. Sometimes you may fix something, or may ask for a feature, or you may, I don't know, have an intern or an engineer. So the power actually is on the other way around. When you start controlling an open source project, the entire world starts relying on you. So you start having power on your competitor, not the other way around. So this is the goal. This is what Intel does. This is what Google does. This is what IBM does. They are the top contributors of key open source projects, so they shape the future. That's the idea.
So as you said, using open source is really nice, and it makes your life easier. But what about developing an open source product? How do we fund ourselves as open source developers, or you know? So do we only rely on funding, or sorry, donations only?
I'm not sure to understand. It's from the perspective of getting started in open source, or you have a product and you want to open source it? Oh, develop an open source product. This is more about licensing. If you have an idea and you have been bitten by the open source bug and you want to release that way, you release your source code in a way that allows others to contribute and in a way that's favorable to you. There are many licenses. You can even create your own license, which I don't recommend, but you can do. It's free. You do whatever you want. But it's basically about the license. The moment you release the code with a permissive license, it's an open source project and people can contribute. So just to...
I don't think I'm going. Okay. Yeah, loud voice. Okay, so given that today open source has become more of, because everything is moving to the cloud, whether or not it's open source is not relevant to the customer, which is one good reason why we have won in open source. We have Linux, because people don't know that they're using Linux. The problem is, and this is mainly a question for Collabora, because you're based on things that are open source, what do you do to actually entice your customers to release things more into the open source so that we don't end up in the walled garden which Apple and the likes have created for us?
That's a very nice question. Thank you. Sorry. I can give an example of a customer, the project I'm working on, that's a medical device. I can't tell the brand, but you need to spend money on development, but you need to make a choice. Do you want to invest the money in what you do properly? In this case, my customer is a specialist in analyzing body signals, so he can invest all the pile of money he has on what he knows, or if my customer chooses to not do open source, he will invest only part of money on these crazy algorithms that they are the best, and the other part on stuff like drivers, on security, on all stuff that is a problem for everyone. So I go to my customer and say, look, if you want to get rid of me, if you want to focus your money on what you do, make the thing upstream. Everything that's not core to your business, everything that's not the secret for you, everything that's not what you do, make upstream. Make it now. And you get rid of it forever. And by a consequence, all the community gets advantage of it because the product gets better. So it's dependent to the project. The question is who owns it and how you contribute it. The Linux kernel is structured in a way that you have a chain of maintainers, and it will depend on the project. On the graphical stack, things are simpler and stuff like that. So any questions?
So as a startup for online quality content, what is the key advice of using open source for its growth? And what is a risk or a problem that a startup like that should be aware of? Yes. Yes. So I'm working on a startup for online quality content. So for a startup like that, what is a key advice for using open source for its growth? And is there a risk or a problem that we should be aware of?
So it's very similar to my answer to other question. You have basically two choices. You can develop everything you need, so you need to spend time on it, and after you have the code working, you need to maintain it, or you can find building blocks that does more or less what you want, and then you invest time only on the integration. And after you integrate, then you can start to sending back part of your contributions. Everything that's not key to your solution, you can send it back, and then that part won't be your problem anymore. So I see as risk if you don't engage properly in the projects that are key for your company, that can be bad for you, because if you don't participate on the community, you have no idea to where the project is going. So maybe a feature that's important for you will be removed. So I would say that would be the main risk. And this is the kind of stuff that we avoid. Any questions? Okay, so I guess that's it. So just as a final example of the size of the open source today. So I checked the size recently about the Linux kernel, and this is just the Linux kernel itself. It's just one of the main open source components, and the Linux kernel has almost 15 million lines of code. And to give you an idea of how big that is, on the main opening discussion today, we are talking about 4% of the bank money being invested on startups. And the number they said was $650 million. And this is the estimated amount of money to re-implement the Linux kernel from scratch. So you can use that for free. That thing is there, is available. And this is only one of the building blocks that's available for you. How can you afford, how can anyone afford not using that? You see, you get the Chromebooks, for example, the thing costs less than $300. How Google could do that without free software? How could Google do that paying licenses? How Google could do that needing to keep the product lifetime without open source? So how can your startup do that? Use the thing that's there. Engage on the community. Make the thing better. That's I guess, the most important message. So I guess that's it. I'll just give fast an overview of Collabora, what we do, where we are, what we do. Can we go to the next one, please? So Collabora was founded in 2005. Our headquarters in Cambridge, England. We have offices in Montreal, Canada. We have engineers all around the world. We are always hiring. So if you want to work with free software, please join us. I'm from Switzerland. So that's it. We are full stack related to open source. We can guide you, we can integrate, train, optimize, build, and maintain. Usually this is the most expensive part, and most people simply ignores it. The day the product is out, you simply forget about it, and then 2 years later you realize that you need to start again. So that's key. We are everywhere. I can go too fast now. Automotive. We are doing a lot of interesting stuff. We participate, we have key people that's related to automotive free software stuff for in-car entertainment, for communication, for very interesting stuff that I can talk to, but very big integrators. We are not working with brands like Volkswagen. We are working with part suppliers that provide parts to all of those. So semiconductor company, this is very interesting market for us, because there are many companies that still don't get the open source thing properly, so they suffer a bit, and we have the solution. Digital TV, this was a big thing a few years ago. We still have some work to do, but we have many customers in this area. Healthcare, the thing I work with, we have many customers that realize healthcare today landscape is very interesting, because we have like 3 or 4 massive players that are sitting in a pile of money, that are looking to everyone and say, hey, we are invincible. But we are starting to have very small companies that are selling very cheap products that does more or less the same. So the big vendors still have their safe certification chain. They have good relationship with big hospitals. They know how to sell the product. But when those hospitals start seeing, hey, instead of paying X, I can pay 1/10 of the value and I have the same thing, those guys will be in trouble. This is why they are running for open source. Or they do or they die. They have no option. So this is health today is a very interesting market for innovation. This is a huge market. Government spends millions and millions in that. So That's something we do. OEM is very similar to silicon that I showed before with slightly difference. This is more when you pick up different parts and you make a product. So, I don't know, you can have a setup box that will be the next slide, you can have a camera which is here, so we can help you minimizing the time to make the thing ready. We are part of the Linux Foundation. I'm a kernel developer, so that's what I do. We did a lot of stuff with Android, lot of stuff. Recently we integrated on the Linux kernel fencing. That was an advanced stuff, that was a mess, and we fixed that, so that was really nice. Raspberry Pi, we were involved on the first version of the software. We did all that stuff. Wayland Western, for who doesn't know, is like the graphics stack. So we are involved in that too. Yeah, please. So the Steam machine, we were involved on the early days of the Steam machine. So that was a very interesting project too. Some projects, so setup boxes, that is the marketing team. I'm sorry, this is longer than I was expecting. Can go, so tablets, this is, I can't say what tablet is that, but you know, medical devices, gambling machines, in-flight entertainment. That is very nice to show, but it's actually a simple device, but a very cool one. We had issues with power management there, so it was very interesting, and a very similar device for outdoor and even indoor advertisement. So I guess that's it. I spent way less than 1 hour that I was, and I am open for questions. Okay. If you have questions about how is to work with open source as an engineer, it will be welcome too.
Thank you very much. What I would like to know is that I've been around 12 years in developing applications, and some of the algorithms that I worked with, some people are pushing me into make them open source. So it's okay, it's about contribution, I understand, and it's a very nice idea from the general perspective, let's say. But at the end, we need to make a living, okay? And I would like to understand more, how can I make a living if I open sourced one of my projects? I contribute and people will contribute with me, but I need to feel safe about my ideas, that nobody will steal or will steal this idea and make it as a license and I will lose, okay? So I will lose my idea before I will lose my money. So let me feel safe about this, because I think this is the most strange things to us, is to open our ideas. It's nice, but it have a little bit risk.
This is actually the main challenge related to open source, and basically the answer is related to relevance. When you have a closed source application, the success of your algorithm is limited to your capacity of selling it. So if you are Microsoft, if you are, I don't know, Apple, that's okay. You can reach worldwide dominance and you can make people depend on your solution. But if you are small, by making your solution open source, you are exposing yourself to the chance of becoming relevant to a lot of people that you even never imagined. So I wouldn't start doing that from one day to another, completely everything, but one at a time. If you have multiple algorithms, start with one, see what happens, try to get people to use it, try to fix bugs when people do that, and when you have someone that starts contributing, take the most of it. Takes the most of it, because this is the loop that makes open source awesome. People using your idea, your relevance. Think about Linus Torvalds, for example. He never did that for what Linux is today. He loves doing it. It's his hobby. So he did it very well. He was the right person to do it. And did this answer your question?
I mean, at the end, how can you make a living? Okay, from having an open source project, let's say worldwide.
Small comment about that, that's all. 2 points, at least my opinion about it. If it's relevant as an algorithm and you don't open source it, someone else will. And if they do, people will hire them to build extra stuff on top of it. So that's how you make money in open source, right? It's not free, it's just open, so other people can actually play with it. And if they want to use it in something commercial, they will still have, if your license says, support costs X, they will still have to pay it. But if you don't open source, and it's a good algorithm, someone else is going to do it, and then they will call them, not you, because as far as the world is now concerned, they are the creator of the algorithm, not you anymore.
Yes, that's very well said. So thanks a lot. Any other questions? Oh.
How can your organization be of help for startups? How can we use your services? How can you help?
How can Collabora be useful to startups? So if you have a startup and if you use any kind of software, you can contact us and we can tell you what we know about free software, which pieces of free software can be useful for you, and if you need any service like integration, support, or involvement with the community, this is actually the most valuable service we can provide. So I guess that's it. So did this answer your question? Just a second.
Hi. I just want to ask, how can a local traditional business grow to online, okay, and where to start, and which is the most important building block to go to cloud system? And you have already established business system that works traditionally. I just want to go online. Where to start?
That question is not entirely related to open source, but the answer is still valid. I guess, yes. I guess the way to start is one step at a time. So if you have a traditional business and you have a system somewhere, you don't start taking off, pulling the power plug of the old system and starting again on the cloud. You start something new, one layer that almost doesn't do anything, very, very slowly, and from there you add value to that, you show how awesome that is, how can this be important for your business, and then you start migrating. So if you try this shock approach, we need to do that or we die, we need to do that now, that's too risky and I don't think the result will be good. If you do one layer at a time, very slowly but steady and showing results, I guess this is the best approach. Does this help? Okay, we can talk after. Yeah, just a second.
Starting our approach with the open source, you mentioned earlier that you train. How can we join the training? Is there like an online academy or something?
You mean of open source in general? Open source is awesome because you don't even need to be a coder to join. So if you're a programmer, then you simply choose something that you like or love, and then you do. But if you're not a coder, there are two areas in which it's very, very nice to contribute, to participate in the community that are related to language, that is translation and documentation. In the Linux kernel, for example, they are migrating from a crazy, messy documentation system to Sphinx. And the result is awesome. So if you want to become a kernel programmer now, you can simply copy and paste text from different locations and put it in a more structured way that requires no programming knowledge and from one day to another, your name will be in history as a contributor for the Linux kernel. So you are part of the community. You don't even need to be a coder. The time is very valuable. Engineering time is very valuable. So if you have time and if you have the passion to do something in a project that you like, documentation and translation are the most two awesome ways of getting started.
Thanks, Peter. I have a two-part question. What is the typical revenue mix of companies that are purely source code? I mean, do they generate their revenues from services, or is it more training or support? And the second part is, have you seen a lot of companies that have proprietary software turning totally into open source, and how has the revenue mix worked out for them?
So for the first part of the question, where the money comes from, Collabora is a consultancy company. So from the Collabora perspective, our money comes from service. So the customer tells us what the customer wants, and we do service. So my main focus, I spend most of my time doing programming stuff. So I do programming, Collabora sells my time to a customer, and the customer pays Collabora, and that's basic service. But sometimes I do training too. So I spend 1 week on the customer giving training on performance. So that's a mix. That varies a lot. That varies company to company, but it's service in general. On the same line of his question, the market sees us as the specialist, and they pay for the specialists do the service for them. They want the best ones to do the service, and that's... This answers your question. I don't remember the second part, sorry. Oh yes, if I see a lot of proprietary migrating to free software. Completely no, because this would be like a massive change. But I can give a very nice example, that's Microsoft. It was very fun to do the Linux versus Windows thing, and today Microsoft uses Linux. Microsoft contributes to Linux. Microsoft pay people to be full-time Linux kernel developers. So the kernel is better today because of Microsoft. And they do that not because they're generals, because they have nightmares of what they've done in the past. They do that because this gives them money. They have loads and loads and loads of cloud computing services that the customers demand to be in Linux. And they need that their cloud service run well on Linux. So, okay. Any other questions? We have time.
Big fan, so. How do you, if you've noticed, a lot of people who ask questions, and this is something I deal with quite a lot personally because I try to support open source when I can. How do you deal with people thinking open source is free software? I know historically we had this dilemma between the Free Software Foundation and the open source movement and etc. But for some reason, people tend to think if it's open source, it is automatically free, which is not a reality in any shape, way, or form, right? So how do you deal with people with that kind of mentality? How do you fix it, basically?
That's a very interesting question, but I don't have a precise, generic, one answer fits all for this case. Yes, but what I can tell you, for example, is that at this moment in the Linux kernel is facing a very interesting moment because there is the Free Software Foundation, the Richard Stallman created, and those guys are the guys for the license. Those guys are for freedom. Those guys know what they are doing. But there is this Software Freedom Conservancy that are very radical guys, and those guys were considering suing companies that they consider to be the bad guys. And this is not how you get people engaged. If you need police, if you need force, if you need ammunition to make them comply, you lost. You simply lost. You lose your relevance, you lose your confidence, you lose everything that you conquered. So the way of doing anything to make people comply, to make people join, is showing them the advantages. Is showing them, say, look at the other side. Look what happened to Intel. Intel in the early 90s, they were the bad guys. They were the bad guys. They were what NVIDIA was like 3-4 years ago. And Intel is one of the most important contributors for more than a decade. So this is how you join them. You bring them to your group. You say, look, there is something better for us, but with you included. So, any other question? Oh.
Sorry, I'm a little bit interested in the idea. Can we have, let's say, a real example? I have a project and I want to go for open source. What are the steps that is needed for me to do it, and how to get help and how to exist in this community?
I don't have any example. The one that came in mind was like LibreOffice. That was something from Corel, I guess, at some time. The company doesn't even exist, it became Oracle after, I don't know. But the project still exists, it's still relevant. So that was an example. And for your specific case, I guess we can sit and discuss, I can talk. I'll be here all the week, so it will be a pleasure to help you. Okay. So, oh.
I have some comments for the previous questions. I personally submitted a few projects online as open source, and it turned out well for me because I got a lot of consulting offers from that. But what I discovered is like when you do that with your project, you just don't put it on GitHub and wait for something to happen. You have to be a bit proactive to get people to know about what you did. So write blog comments, check around the web, people looking for solutions like yours, and let them know that you have this open source project. And when it gets started, then it's gonna grow by itself. That's it. But you can get money from your open source project. The first one I did, I was a student. I didn't have any interest in making money out of this. One of the projects I did was a visualization program for Linux. And when I finished my studies, a guy from the United States contacted me because he wanted some improvement, integrate that into VLC and whatever. And I started to work for him on this open source project he had. And it was not like a plan, but it did work out. And another example, 4 years ago, we were developing a game for the mobile platform on Cordoba, if you know Cordoba, or PhoneGap. The in-app purchase integration was not so good at this time, so I improved the plugin and I made it so it worked on both Android and iOS. Started from that, people started to hire me to make the integration of in-app purchase into their applications. And this year we are trying to develop a backend for the billing part of mobile application, and this we try to sell as a service as well. So, I mean, there are ways to make money out of open source. But I think, yeah, you need to just not put it out, and you need to make some like marketing, the low-profile marketing, make people know what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you need to carry it. Sometimes it just works out by itself. The first things I do, I don't know how. It was in 1998. I pushed it on the internet. It was for MP3 visualization, and it got like 1 million downloads pretty quickly. And at this time, I was young and so happy to see that happening. Yeah, but then it turned out I made money out of it. It was not something expected, but yeah, it works out.
So thank you very much. You see, my audience is better prepared than myself, so thank you very much. So there is a joke about the Linux kernel that you need to do what you want before you send your 5th patch, because when you send the 51, you got a job offer. So that's more or less on the same line. So, and this is why if you find an open source project and you contribute, doesn't matter with what, if you contribute, that will be amazing for you. So, thank you very. Oh yeah, sure.
Sorry, this is slightly off topic, but I'm a system administrator for a school up near Babda, and we've been running solely open source software at the school for about the last 8 years. And one of the things I've found is that when we switched over to Linux on the desktop, so for us it's been the year of the Linux on the desktop for a while, as we switched over, one of the things I found is that I did want to take part and contribute in different things. When we switched from single-seat desktops to multi-seat desktops when systemd started supporting that. And one of the things I had to do was start debugging issues that we were running into and send fixes back upstream where the bugs were at. And because it was open source software, I could fix the bugs. I could fix the problems. And that's, I think, for us, been one of the core reasons that we use open source software. When we hit problems, I'm able to fix it. I'm not dependent on somebody else to fix the problems for me. And in the end, for us, it's obviously cut software costs, but it's also cut our hardware costs because we're able to make far more efficient use of our hardware. So, for whatever that's worth.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So, by making your software open source, you make your software better because it will be exposed to use cases that are not use cases for you. So,
an incident that might help people. Personally, when I develop for my clients, I give them all the source code, even when it's a product. And my experience has been, even though they have the source code and they can go to a much cheaper developer, because I know I charge more than market rate, they still come back. And the reason tends to be, when I sit and talk to them, is cost of code is cheap, right? What we develop as engineers is not just those few lines of code that we write. It's actually, the design and the structure and the architecture. And by giving them the source code, they are able to fix, like he said, the small bugs and get going. And what they will come back for are the more difficult things where you actually make money, because that's where your margin and your experience happens. So, it all tends to flow into each other. It's a difficult thing. It means to let go a bit of control, and it's always difficult to think, hey, the pie might also get shorter. But I think there's a chance that we can succeed, and it never hurts to start trying.
one more question. So I'm very happy with the participation. Thank you a lot for that. That's awesome.
You're welcome. I don't have a question. I'm just going to comment about something he said. Ethically, you have to give a source code for your client. It's not yours. He paid for the time to have this source code. Also, I see some companies that wouldn't give a domain name. It's not yours. It's just a DNS, whatever, hold on a server. I mean, if the server goes down, anyone else can take it. You're just paying for power supply on a server. That's all. You don't own the domain. You don't own anything. It's all to the client. You should give them that. Also, if you want to make some money from open source, there are lots of ways. You can go to telecom, let's say. In telecom, you got many Radius servers or NAS client servers. Right now, simply, let's say in Lebanon, if you go to modify a small thing in a Radius server, you're getting paid about $5,000 American dollars for 1 hour work. I mean, that's how you make money from open source. If it's, let's say, Linux, Red Hat, okay, they take money, but that's for support. You are getting paid for your time, not the program itself. It's not something that you make and keep selling, copying and pasting, copying and pasting. It's all from the support. You can either give it for free if you want, or you can give it for your time, but eventually you don't own that stuff. You don't own the program. And whenever you want to modify on something that's open source, also keep in mind that the modification you made, it's still not yours to go and put it up on GitHub, let's say, and ask people to download it. It's still not yours. It's licensed to be used by you free and give it to your friends, let's say. Well, there are a lot of times you go, let's say I take Apache and I'm gonna modify on it and say it's my Apache. It's not yours. You can modify, but it's not yours. Licensing thing, yeah. Exactly, exactly. So I'm just gonna talk about the ethical part. It's very important to be ethical with our clients. That's it.
I just want to comment about what he just said. Well, the code is mine. I was the one who programmed it, but it's a matter of opinion whether he wants to give it to the client or not. Well, he can, of course, give it to the client to fix some bugs or something like that, but he may put like some conditions if he wanted to change some major features in the program that he must return to me because I was the original coder or programmer of the code. That's what I want.
Actually, those licensing and ownership issues can be determined before you do the coding. So both are correct and wrong depending on the contract, depending on the license you use. So if there is a company that's paying for you, for example, my contributions to Linux kernel, when I do that for Collabora, the copyright assignment goes to Collabora, not to me. I sign with my name, so I did the code, I get the cookies, but the copyright holder is Collabora, not myself. When I do that on my free time, then it's completely mine. But if Collabora is paying, it's them and I'm happy. They send me here, so it's up to you. But you're right, and you are right too, so it depends, it's open.
Just a few comments. One, I completely agree with you about from an ethics point of view. Of course, it depends on the contract, but personally, the logic of the client belongs to the client. But if I developed a library that makes me deliver the code for him 15 times faster, it is my property. Giving him that source code is me being open source. It's not an ethical situation. The second point, the one that you said about taking Apache and doing it my Apache, I think you're being slightly judgmental there because forking is an acceptable practice in the open source. For you to say it is my Apache, you have to do something fundamentally different, yes? So when we fork, like for example, LibreOffice and OpenOffice, LibreOffice started with OpenOffice. It was an exact fork, and then we moved away from it. And MariaDB is an exact fork from MySQL, and the only reason we forked is because Oracle bought some, right? And we were afraid MySQL would become this new license and we wouldn't be able to use it. So sometimes forking happens. In general, it happens under institution, but let's not look at it as a dark side. You might have actually done something significant for you to say, yes, this is my version of Apache, for example. So just, if you just copy it and change one line of code, yes, you're being an ass, basically. Sorry, but if you actually did contribution, it is wiser that it might be a fork, but remember, you're going to maintain it. Somebody has to maintain. So you pay a price for forking every time a project.
So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be invited and to be here and to have this awesome audience. Thank you very much.